Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
It's your old pal Stickpot 2 here, along with my good friend Steve Axie and that Matt Killer for another episode of Coolly Gentlemen.
Woo. I don't really have an opening bit for this one because we're talking about some serious cinema here. So.
I can sense the sarcasm. I'm going to throw an axe at you.
Damn. Yeah, so here we are for Steve's pick, The Woman in the Yard. So what made you want to talk about this one, Steve?
Yeah. All right. So as you guys all know, I go to the movie theater a lot. I see basically every new release. And so what that means is between like January to like April, I'm just seeing shitty horror movie after shitty horror movie after shitty horror movie. And I enjoy shitty horror movies. I think it's fun to go to the movie theater and watch just like the cringiest, most nauseating horror movie on the planet. And most of those horror movies are Blumhouse movies, because Blumhouse is, at the end of the day, the ultimate in horror slop factory. All they do is they buy up the rights to things and they release movies. You can bet your ass if Blumhouse has bought the rights to something, it will become a movie eventually. Will it be good? Will anyone serious be attached to it? Will anyone remember it after 3 months? No. But they will get the movie made. And so there's a lot of those, and a lot of those movies just kind of like ride trends. And so because of that, for one reason or another, I skipped the movie theater the weekend The Woman in the Yard came out, because I'm like, okay, another Blumhouse slop horror movie has come out. I've got other things I need to do today. I'm not going to watch it. And then a few of the critics I tend to agree with started talking about how good it was, and that it actually reminded them quite a bit of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, which is one of my favorite horror movies. And so on that advice, God damn it. The horror slop factory of other stuff that they put out, it's not only leagues above that, but like on every subsequent rewatch, it kind of feels like one of the only modern horror movies that I've seen where the filmmakers really seriously care about how much of the story is in the visuals and how much of the themes they can convey in a really tight window of a very generic genre that they're able to try and make the most out of. And I think, if nothing else, when you're putting it in the context of all the terrible horror movies that come out on an annual basis, it's kind of wild that this one is as good as it is, and that it's as coherent as it is in a lot of ways. Because when we see studios like Blumhouse, who all they care about is just making movies, it's really rare that they ever put out something that feels like it has any sort of like emotional staying power. And when I first saw this in the theater, I'm like, I was so surprised that this was coherent that it took me a few watches before I was even able to get to the idea of like, oh no, it's not just coherent, it's actually kind of good. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. And it's not quite a mother-daughter story as much as it's a mother-son story, but I think the way it handles the mother as a character and suicide as a theme and the relationship between the three central characters is nuanced and interesting enough where I think it kind of fits into
because you could have just picked Carrie and no one would have blunk.
I know, I wanted to pick Carrie, but I was like, everyone's going to say Carrie, and I don't want to do Carrie.
I have to be a contrarian.
I was looking, I was digging, I was like, I want to find a movie that fits within the theme, but I don't want it to be a movie that everyone's going to think about, that we're going to do like Carrie. And I was trying to find one that was like actually written or directed by a woman if we were going to do this theme, and honest to God, I could not find very many horror movies about
Interesting.
motherhood directed
Okay.
or written.
No, I
by
mean,
women.
fair enough. I do think that this was quite good. It is much better than the trailers led me to believe it would be. Is my main takeaway. I don't know if it's
Yes.
like a great movie or anything. I think that maybe it's a little bit on the nose in certain ways. I'm actually a little surprised that the actress playing the mother is not also the one playing the woman in the yard, because that would have just, I guess, driven the point home too hard. But like I remember seeing the trailers with Haley. I remember watching the trailers and just looking at her and going like, well, that looks terrible. And we both just kind of laughed it
Yeah,
off.
that's why I skipped
and then,
it. Yeah.
you know, we started watching it tonight, or the other night, and she's like, oh, this one? I'm like, yeah, Steve picked it. And I'm like, all right. And it was, you know, a lot better than I was led to believe. Oh, god damn it. This is just gonna be the thing tonight. I'm sorry. People just gonna have to deal with it. It's got spooky noises to it, so there you go. I'll get it fixed next week, I promise. Even if that means that I have to install a new version of Windows on my computer. Yeah, I know. I talked to Steve about this a couple weeks ago. I'm still running Windows 7 on this machine, so...
Oh my god.
Right.
What the fuck? That's the
Right?
scariest
That's what I
thing
said.
in this episode.
That's what I said. It's not just me. That's fucked up, dude. You
don't
gotta
want
upgrade
to.
your Windows.
I have pirated programs on this computer. I'm gonna have to repirate them. That's hard work.
That's fair.
Yes.
It's also a lot harder now than it used to be.
Oh my
Just
god.
get today's sponsor, NordVPN.
Yeah.
And this is a podcast, so you can't even
Right.
you don't even know where to click around to skip
So
the
anyway,
ad.
yeah, watching this, I was quite surprised. Is my main takeaway. I don't know if it's like necessarily like good or jaw dropping. Again, I think you might like if you didn't call that, especially when it's like, "Why am I here?" Is like one of the opening lines from the woman in the yard. And just as things develop with her, it like becomes increasingly obvious what the purpose of the monster is. And not that like I have any room to talk because I'm still like episode 1 of Horror Month this year. Like, oh yeah, the monster is addiction. You're right. So like maybe beating me over the head too much
I mean-
is more what Ian needs, but I don't know.
I will preface before Matt goes. Might be remembered in 20 years. I don't think it's that, but I do think that in the sea of horror movies that come out in any given year, this is not only above like that median threshold of bad horror movies, but it's also competent on a level that quite honestly you just can't expect horror movies to be at this point. Like, oh shit, they're doing interesting things with the camera. That's a first in like 4 years.
I mean, I think that this might be like an entirely separate discussion, but it is something I think about a lot. Of expectations can drastically change the assessment you have of a movie, or of anything. Like, which is why I kind of hate hype culture as much as I do, because when you overhype something way too hard, and like every trailer or something from a movie that's coming out just gets like, you know, discussed as if it's going to be the greatest thing ever. It's so hard, if not damn near impossible, for a movie to live up to that, and vice versa. If you just like spend a year just dogging on every trailer from a movie, then anything that comes out, as long as it's not the worst film ever, you now look like a fucking idiot. Like, as long as just a semi-competent film came out from this trailer and stuff that we just mocked mercilessly, well, now you look like a fool. And I think I've taken part in both sides of it. I think, like, the reaction to The Dark Knight Rises is a pretty good example, where, like, Dark Knight got hyped up for so long, and then the trailers and everything started dropping for Dark Knight Rises. Everyone's like, it's gonna be the face of God again, and then it just wasn't. It's just not as good a movie. Like, whether or not you enjoy it, it's just not as good as the previous entries. So it kind of like the hype can ruin it, or the hype can or the hate can just make you look like a fool. And so to get this where you just kind of see the trailers and it's like, well, that looked kind of like shit. Maybe the marketing department did the movie a favor. I don't know. I don't know how well it did. Like, yeah, you get the premise. There's a woman in the yard. She's gonna try to kill the children or whatever. That's all you need to know about the movie, and it doesn't give the game away and stuff. So I don't know. It was an interesting one.
Yeah, I don't know. I for my general thoughts, like, I had never heard of this movie, so I didn't have any of that. I just kind of went into it and was like, all right, here's a movie. And what I found was a movie in the long-running span of movies that are sort of the monster or entity is a very obvious and occasionally on-the-nose metaphor for grief, depression, trauma, whatever,
like this
societal.
more modern trend.
I think so. I know Babadook really popularized it, I feel, but I couldn't tell you what started it.
There's definitely been a thing in the last 10, 15 years of this thing called elevated horror, and within elevated horror, because you've got all these horror movies that are trying to be prestige or serious, like Hereditary and The Babadook and The Witch and all that stuff, but underneath that you've also got this trend of what one person has dubbed a meta for her, where all the horror movies is like this, Imaginary is like this, Woman in the Yard. There, at any given year, you could pick at least 2 or 3 horror movies, and they fall into the metaphor genre of the monster is drama.
Yeah, exactly. And so, when I was watching this, and it became immediately apparent from just the get-go that that's what this was going to be, I wasn't really thinking about this in comparison to their Blumhouse pictures. I was kind of thinking about this as another entry in this sort of pseudo-subgenre that we have within horror. And within that framework, I found myself thinking, all right, this is a, at times, extremely well shot and competently put together, drama about the depression and guilt and, sort of the intrusive thoughts that this mother is dealing with and the way that these things are kind of weighing on her. But I always found it just kind of lacking. This is a movie that I finished and I know I'm never going to think about again. And I find myself looking back at I think of something like It Follows or Babadook, or even one of the more kind of middling, banal ones like Smile. And I'm like, each of those has something that grabbed me, whether it's the crazy atmospheric vibes of It Follows, the fucking actual genuine moments where I'm scared in Babadook, or with Smile, the shocking brutality of it and the insanely creative creature designs at the end. And then I turn to this movie and I'm just it's got that one really harrowing scene near the end, and it's got some really pretty shots of this farmhouse, and it's certainly a script that knows what it's doing, and it's a director who knows how to complement the script with the being a horror film. I don't think it's... I think it's kind of reductive to determine the quality of a horror movie by just whether or not it's scary, but it wasn't. So that didn't help. And I found myself just thinking, yeah, this is fine, basically. And unfortunately, that was the end of my thoughts about it. So yeah.
One thing I'll definitely give you is that this one is not particularly scary. And I mean, of course, with horror, you kind of have to stop and say okay, well, what do you mean by scary, right?
Sure.
Does it have a lot of jump scares? Were you unsettled by the ideas or what? So there's going to be a host of horror movies that I think aren't filled with jump scares that are scary, and then a lot of ones that are filled with jump scares that are scary. And so I will definitely give you that. I was never like unnerved by this movie in the sense that like it was giving me that sort of like hair on the back of my neck, cold sweat kind of feeling. But what I do like about this one over a lot of the movies in this kind of style is it takes so much advantage of how you can visually lay out these themes in a way that's really easily communicated to the audience, but is on such a higher level than a lot of other movies that try to do this. Because like you watch like Talk to Me, for example. Talk to Me is a pretty good movie. I like Talk to Me. I think it's fine. But the whole premise of that movie of like letting go of the person that died so that they're not sucking you out of your own life, it's not shot like that's the idea behind the movie. It's not shot with this intention of like, how do you frame this character so that their feelings are the things that are being conveyed in the frame. When you don't do that, you kind of have to rest on the dialogue to be the only thing that does that. And I think what's so good about the woman in the yard is, or from the get-go, it's so good about how it's framing these characters, how it's putting the mother and the son on oppositional sides of the frame, how there's these constant motifs of looking inside someone's eye and seeing either the mom or the woman in the yard, and oscillating between not just the looks in the eye, but objects or mirrors or circles or things that look like eyes to constantly kind of hit you over the head with this idea that these two are the same person. And it's got these moments where it probably could have done with a little bit more ambiguity than it ultimately has, because I think by the end it's actually really clear what's going on with a lot of this stuff. But I do still really like that. Like when you get the scene where she goes back and talks about what happened to the dad in the car accident, and you look in the rear view mirror and you see the woman and you see that she's kind of unshaken, and this idea starts to present itself of, she didn't just drive the car and they crashed. She probably crashed the car on purpose, and she just happened to be the one that survived. And then at the end, when she's getting ready to kill herself, and then when they leave, in the final shot of the movie is her name on a painting, but it's backwards, so it's that idea of like, oh, she did kill herself. This is just her fantasy life of what it would be like if she did. And those kinds of things where it does such a good job of making sure that the viewer is paying attention to communicate its story, and it doesn't concern itself with this idea of you have to dumb it all down in dialogue, because if someone's not paying attention, they still have to know what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I did find myself impressed by a lot of the framing choices in this, because this is directed... I'm not going to say his name because I'm going to butcher it, but this is directed by the same guy who did two horror movies I love, which is House of Wax and Orphan.
Yeah! He's so good!
I adore those films, and also Black Adam for some fucking reason. But
he also did all of the shitty Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Liam Neeson star vehicles like Jungle Cruise and Nonstop and Run All Night and all those movies.
Yeah, so when that is your track record, I found myself kind of enamored by a lot of the choices being made here. I think particularly about like when she picks up the mug and throws it down, because you have this like very traditionally shot scene of just this sequence of her chatting with her kids, and then suddenly it's interrupted by this really creative camera movement that accentuates the the suddenness of her doing this like violent outburst. And he does that a lot. There's a lot of moments where things that are disturbing or off kilter are supported with a Dutch angle or a bizarre camera movement or going through some sort of refractory thing like a window or an eye or a reflection. And it's those little attention to detail moments that I do think elevate this film even within the genre of elevated horror in the biggest quotation marks I can muster. And so I do appreciate that, and I don't want you to think that I'm missing out on that, because I hear you and you are seen and you are valid. But I still find myself kind of thinking that we're not... I don't feel that it takes a lot of advantage of it being a horror film. I feel like there was more expanding on this concept of a woman in the yard that could have been done. I think about a lot of these movies where the monster is a metaphor for something, but the monster is still something. It's still some sort of folkloric deity. It's still something. And so the woman in the yard being this purely metaphorical force, this purely metaphorical force, and missing out on something to maybe ground it outside of that. I don't know. And maybe that doesn't make sense to anyone else but me. But like, I just feel like I would have liked to have seen something more in that direction, and for it to end up being this purely metaphorical thing, it just kind of, I don't know. It just kind of loses something for me, and it makes me less intrigued by it.
I think for me, the biggest problem the movie has is just like, you know, it's not. It's an R-rated film, but it doesn't really need to be. Like, there's some heavy subject matter, but not enough actually happens on screen to make it feel like it earns that R rating. You know? She off-screen kills the chickens, and she off-screen kills the dog, and that's it. Like, nothing else, like, actually, you know, really violent or, like, fucked happens. Just as far as, like, from a visual standpoint, you get, like, that really creepy sequence where you can see her in the flashlight and she's, like, approaching the daughter, saying the words that the mother will say later.
Yeah.
And she looks, like, kind of grotesque and skeletal and stuff, and I think the actress does a good job, but it's still, like, this movie could be rated PG-13 with, like, the level of visuals that it has.
I mean, we're building up to this big scare moment, and all that happens is her shadow gets into the living room and starts pushing a bunch of pots and pans around. And I'm just like, I feel like we've been building and building and building, and then when it's time for shit to hit the fan, it does so in a way that is, like, extremely tame and not terribly interesting to watch, because it's so focused on being this metaphorical thing that I'm just like, and that's great, but, like, I was sold a horror movie, and I'm just not feeling anything that creative or interesting happening within the bounds of how can we communicate the horror of this situation beyond just the kind of fucked up intrusive thoughts and emotional outbursts from Ramona, which are disturbing in their own way, but don't exactly excite me as the horror viewer. So I don't know if it's maybe just a disconnect there between myself wanting to appreciate the thematic elements and myself wanting to just watch a good horror movie. I don't know.
To your point about the R rating, I feel like it's almost entirely rated R because the finale is take a gun to your head and kill yourself. Like, it feels like that scene, the censors were like, okay, now it's rated R. But everything else around that could be a PG-13. If this movie came out in the 80s, it would have been a PG movie. Like, there's really not enough. Yeah, there is not enough here to, like, warrant an R, aside from the idea that people find the idea of a movie dealing with suicide to be taboo in some way, shape, or form. But Matt, to your point, one of the things I do think is kind of lacking in this movie is when you have such clarity of vision, sometimes the reason that it can feel like there's not enough kind of oomph at the end is you don't have any sort of, like, resistance or tension that's created by the idea itself. Like, you can say whatever you want or what you believe in, and you can put it into your script, but if the script in the movie is a delivery mechanism for your idea unimpeded, then without any sort of natural resistance, then it makes the experience feel a little bit too passive. And I do think that is here a bit. I think the stuff with the mother and the son is really, really good. But one of my problems with the movie is I feel like it's a really briskly paced movie. Like, it's really short. It's not even 90 minutes. And I really think it could have stood to be a little bit longer, because the moment where the son is confronting the woman in the yard and she tells him that her mom's been lying to him about the way their father died, I don't think that there is enough in the movie to give us a sense that these two are in conflict over that relationship. Like, there's definitely a lot of antagonism back and forth between him picking up the responsibility for her as a mother that he shouldn't have to do, and I really like a lot of those scenes. But the idea that it all kind of hinges on the fact that she's in denial about what happened to their dad, I would have loved more moments where we were in the son's perspective and we were kind of musing more on the relationship he did have to his dad, or how they took the night that she came home and he was dead. She is so much the anchor of this movie that you kind of get from her point A to point B really cleanly, and there isn't a lot of like roadblocks in the way of the story of that kind of create that sort of tension that I would like. But on the other hand, I think what I really like about the simplicity of all that is it lets you really marinate in the idea that the woman in the yard, as she when you get to that weird sort of time loopy thing at the end, it really does a good job of recontextualizing all of the creepy stuff in the movie up until that point, as you're watching two sides of the same woman interact with her kids. That the idea that she comes into the house and she's just wrecking shit and throwing things on the floor, the idea that she yells at the daughter for not doing her R's right, then hallucinates this sequence where she hugs her and stabs her in the back. And then when you cut back to reality, she's hugging and stabbing the pillow, but there's no actual gratification to the viewer that, oh, she actually apologized to her daughter. We don't know that she did. That tension could still just be there in the air. And I think that really lends weight to the moment in the attic when the disfigured skeletal woman is talking to her like she's her mom. From the perspective of the kid and from the emotions in the movie, it's because at that point, she's embodying like all the terrible things that this mom has done, and the kid legitimately doesn't see the difference between that sort of bipolar behavior. And I like all of that about it. I think it does a really good job in like the mundane side of it, that it's kind of building up to the woman coming in, and then when she comes in, there isn't like a great disturbance in the force, because the way the mom behaves is exactly how the monster behaves, and that's what's so scary about it. Scary. And
speaking of that scene in the attic,
no, for sure.
Do you feel that it's maybe like a little bit of a violation of monster rules that the woman gets into the attic? Because like she's established to kind of move with the shadows. And then they get in the attic, and there's like that moment where the daughter's being dragged because of the one light source. And they block off the light source, and they block off the attic, and they're just in the dark. And there's like a lot of banging and stuff, and it's like, it's freaky. But then they just like turn on the flashlight, and she's just in there with them. And like, you know, outside of the whole metaphor for depression, and the woman in the yard is the mother, and so she's in there with them. So, like from a narrative or like a metaphorical standpoint, it makes sense. But just from like the way that we're seeing the monster work, well, then why did she fucking do this all day? It's kind of the.
Well, I mean, that's what gets into the. I'm gonna make a second pass at this point. That's what I'm trying to get at to a degree when I say that it's when the monster is purely metaphorical like this, suddenly you can't have that sort of tension. You can't, because the rules don't matter, because the monster just is this other side of Ramona. Whereas if you had a movie where the monster's a monster and it just happens to also represent this thing, then that allows for that tension of how do we defeat the monster, how can we overcome the monster, but the monster doesn't have to play by any rules because it's not a real monster. It is just a metaphorical representation of this thing, and that can work sometimes. I do like that scene you're talking about where the woman is approaching the daughter, and we see a much more clearly Ramona-looking like shadow, like fighting against it almost. Like there's a part of her that is fighting against this because it's two halves of the same coin. But at the same time, it does make it a little bit strange where we established this rule set for how this creature supposedly works, and then we're like, yeah, but not really, actually.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think it sort of struggles with, where it's kind of trying to have its cake and eat it too, where once she starts going into the house, everyone picks up on the fact that the shadow is interacting with shadows and real objects, is the rule, quote unquote, for the monster. Like the son like clocks this immediately and starts like pulling down blinds and stuff like that. And I really don't like that because number one, I just don't buy that anyone would clock that that's what's going on so immediately. And maybe that's just a consequence of the runtime being so slow. So you just kind of have to like kind of assume he sees it happen once, it's good enough. We're just gonna roll with it. But then as you continue on, the movie is so not that the idea that you establish a rule at all feels kind of pointless because you don't need it. Like you're gonna like Ian said, you're gonna get to these points where you start thinking too much about the monster rules because you made me pay attention to them, but you didn't need them to begin with.
Cheap from like a writing perspective to set up a conceit like that and basically almost immediately break it with like really no explanation. I suppose if I were like really trying to reach to justify, she doesn't show up in the attic until they turn on the flashlight and create shadows, but that's so like flimsy and stuff because she's still outside at that point, so it just doesn't feel like fair, you know.
And like Matt said, like at the end of the day, the movie is more concerned with the idea that like the woman and the mom are the same, and that wherever she is going to be, that's where the monster is because she is the monster. But the more you drive that point home, the less you have to care, or the less you should in your writing try to care about the shadow interacting with things. This is such a like visually intelligent movie that when you have the cue where the shadow comes up through the back and it hits the wind chime, and then the wind chime moves, you understand visually what's going on there immediately. And it's cool in one scene when it's just kind of unsettling. Then when it starts to become like the method of attack for the monster, devoid of that idea, it starts to feel, like you said, it feels like poor writing to introduce that rule and do nothing with it. But it also just feels like in the movie that you made, this was not necessary at all. You could have just had them retreat into the attic without having them to pull down the blinds to kind of preserve a rule you've established when you clearly don't care about the rule.
I don't know. Like, again, I feel like it's weird because obviously we don't need more people to show up in the movie, right? We don't need, like, a Cujo situation. You could pick Cujo, Steve. We don't need like a Cujo situation where like, oh, there's hope, there's the mailman or whatever. You don't necessarily need more people, but like to the point about violence, if you're going to have these rules, this like creepy essence and stuff, you kind of need to just have some more shit happen. I know no one in Hollywood has the balls to kill a dog anymore on film. For some reason, we've really lost our knack for that. You couldn't make Cujo today. If you took a script in and said, "Here, make this movie," they'd look at it and say, "This is Cujo. We already made that movie." It's...
Then you turn it back in and you
bring it in. And same thing for Blazing Saddles. They just keep telling me they can't make it anymore. It's already a movie. But like, just the lack of violence, and it's so weird because oftentimes one of the criticisms people throw at a lot of horror movies, and I don't necessarily agree with it most of the time, is it will just be violence for violence sake, and I'm like, no, it's to show you that there are stakes to losing, that you don't just get to go home happy. So, I want to use that to transition to another point that's tangentially related. And it's going to be a weird one to talk about, because no one in this call is black.
Oh no!
Yeah, no, like,
Ian's about to get canceled.
Who was my next door neighbor, one of my best friends growing up, him and his family, like full black, no mixed race or anything. They're like just very black people. And like anytime we would watch a horror movie, we're just like, nope, just leave. No, just go away. Not deal with that. Nope. I think, like, one of the problems with this movie that has, like, a very good black cast and like, very good black actors, just, you know, playing these, this really interesting role that you don't necessarily get for black characters, particularly in the horror genre, and like especially the monster. I think that lady's probably steals the show for as little scenes as she gets, but she's like just devastating every time she's on screen, mask on or off. But the whole premise, Mom, there's a lady at the yard. Nope. Just nope. As I think the, like, from what I've come to understand, as I think the authentic black experience would just be, nope. No, our phones don't work too bad. No one's going outside. If you're black and in the comments, please tell me if I'm right.
To your point about not having like the balls to kill the dog or anything, one of the things we talked about when we reviewed Silent Hill is like I really like the ambiguous ending because it's just so bleak and it's just so mean that after you overcome all of this, you're still kind of stuck there because it defines you so hard at that point. And as I was watching this, and maybe it's because I've been spending so much time playing Silent Hill 2 over the last 2 weeks, this movie really felt very Silent Hill-y to me. It felt very much like this is a movie with lots of weird interactions that don't feel superhuman at a certain point, where so much of it feels like it's messing with your perspective, and at the end of the day, everything that you're interacting with is just a manifestation of your own fucked up backstory or your own fucked up motivations. And part of what I like about the ending, where you get the reverse of her name and you realize that she probably did just kill herself, is I like that it went there. I like that it was mean enough and bleak enough to say, yeah, she is ruining these kids' lives, or so she thinks, and she's going to be better off they're going to be better off without her, or so she thinks. And so she dies, and then her fantasy in that death is that she gets to have her cake and eat it too. Because from the first moment we saw her, she was stuck in the past of this idealized image of what her life with her husband was. And then at the end, she's got the exact same thing with her kids. But at this point, she's already killed herself. And I like that the movie doesn't really let her off the hook because it's so in her own mind at that point, because you're dealing entirely with the woman and Ramona talking back and forth. Everything she says doesn't feel benevolent. It feels manipulative. It feels like this is what you're telling yourself, so you go through with it, not necessarily because it's right. And so when you get to that end, I feel like, especially for the kind of horror movie it is and when it came out, and so many, the problem with so much of this metaphor horror genre is by making the monster so literal, they really trivialize the trauma by defeating it at the end, because they make it this thing that is solid and permanent that you can just walk past. The great thing about the Babadook, like 11 years ago, was at the end of the movie, the Babadook's still there. The whole idea of that movie is that your grief only gets stronger if you don't admit it's there. But after you do, it doesn't just magically go away. It's still there somewhere because you have to live with it. And so many movies in this genre don't have the balls to do that. And this one, I think, it went darker than I thought it was going to. Because in the theater, I was legitimately shocked that the movie ended up being about she wants to kill herself. That's what all of this is amounted to. And then at the end, when you get the idea that she did go through with it, I really didn't think they were going to end on that note. I thought they were going to have a cop-out.
To your point that, no, she really did go through with it is kind of solidified by the fact that we hear the husband's voice again right at the end. That they go through the same thing. So, like, either she did go through with it or she's right back where she started. Is kind of the takeaway I had with it.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, that was it seemed pretty obvious to me that she had gone through with it, and that's like a matter of discussion I've seen from people about this movie, because I feel like the discussion surrounding this movie is kind of fascinating to me, because it's filled with people who either like just genuinely don't seem to get what the movie's going for, or who are very upset about what the movie's going for, because to your point, we don't do things that are this mean, or that are this, mean's not the right word, but that are this confronting. Because I remember seeing someone complaining about just the fact that they even depicted what they depicted in reference to the scene where the woman is like forcing the gun to Ramona's chin, and I'm like, that's like the best fucking scene in the movie. Like, have trigger warnings as much as you want, have content warnings as much as you need to, but like, we need to be able to confront that shit and show that shit in a way that is shocking and that is harrowing, because that's what makes it feel so visceral. So I do like a lot of that, and I gotta admit, there's a scene where she like, I think she goes through, she like opens the closet and like goes through the like gun safe into like a tunnel inside her home, and I was just like, this feels pretty Silent Hill. Like, I did find myself thinking that.
It's so Silent Hill.
I was like, I've played this. I've done this. I will say, because I wanted to broaden for just a second, because you had mentioned it. You had mentioned the woman who plays the woman. How she's so fucking good. Like, I remember watching this, and like as I'm watching it, I think to myself like, oh man, I hope the woman just like stays like a silent, faceless force, and because I'm still in that, like, I hope just this creepy thing that moves forward and forward. But then when we get to the scene where the son goes out and confronts the woman with the gun, and she like pulls the veil off and just starts talking to him, I'm just like, oh, okay, no, this is actually really, like, this is like one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. She's so wonderful. And I was so down for this idea. Dude, she is. And I was so down for this idea that like, oh, she's like revealing shit to the son that's just going to make this like family fall apart. And that's all she has to do to kind of start this train going. But she herself is wonderful. Like, and I think the whole cast is honestly fantastic. The dynamic between Ramona and Taylor, the son, is wonderful, and it helps by the fact that they are both doing an incredibly great job with this material. The Ramona actress in particular, some of her expressions of either like mostly of just abject fear are like, you just really feel them. There's something about the way she's able to communicate like horror and fear and shock that feels very like visceral, and I feel like
the fact that she's like literally crippled throughout the whole movie is just so damn impressive from an acting standpoint. She looks like she is in physical pain every time she's moving around, but just the adrenaline or the need of the situation just keeps her going, you know? I think that's probably my favorite bit.
Yeah. I love both scenes where in the beginning when she wakes up, and then when they cut back to it later when the woman shows up, where she's getting her crutches and she's praying for strength, and then they later recontextualize that she's praying for the strength to kill herself. I love her expressions in both of those moments because they're not particularly strained. They're just kind of like, and when you get that motivation later, that initial expression hits a lot harder. But the scene with her that I love the most, I think, is when she's yelling at the daughter about the backwards R. Because she's got this firmness as a mom that doesn't set up any sort of alarm bells, but then she just keeps going, and it starts to feel like she's off her rocker, and that's when you start cutting into the alternate perspective where she hugs the kid and then stabs her in the back in the mirror. That turn from mom to frustrated mom to really frustrated mom to something's wrong with mom to, oh no, that wasn't me, I'm so sorry, to back to frustrated mom. Like, just the subtleties of that. It's so good, and she's so good in this, especially in the scenes with the son where these two they feel like mother and son. They feel like a real relationship is there. At the very beginning when he's making them breakfast and he puts fucking Doritos in the eggs and they're all just kind of enjoying it, but it's all just so short-lived because the weight of their life crumbling around them is always ever present. The electricity's not there. There's no dog food. The mom is both unable to exact her responsibilities and is then frustrated with the son for trying to be irresponsible. Like all of that stuff between them is so good. And I really feel like you never dislike, or at least I never disliked Ramona, because it does such a good job of putting you in her head and making her both really sympathetic for what she's going through while at the same time showing you the consequences of someone dealing with this.
Like, because without getting too into personal stuff, I definitely know people. I've known people that like suffer from like anxiety and depression, and like the way that they communicate that feels very real. Like it feels like it's coming from a very personal place. I was struck by in the flashback where she is talking about the dinner she has with her husband. And the husband character is sort of struggling to understand exactly what it is that's making her so unhappy. And that feels so real. This idea that, like, it's nothing in particular. It's not one thing. It's not one thing. It's the collective sum of everything. And this feeling of, like, I can't point to a thing and say that's making me sad. I just am. And it's like, that felt very real. And I was like, this is coming from such a personal place. And I feel like whoever wrote this script clearly has that, like, personal experience with depression or with someone who has it. Because, like, a lot of these ideas and the way that she keeps envisioning... Because that's, like, a common thing that people ask with, like, suicide. Like, why would you do that when you have a family and stuff like that? And this nails that idea of, like, well, she thinks that they're better off without her. You know, even if in reality that's so far the opposite. But this movie does a very good job of communicating that, not just through very obvious, like, basically having that conversation with the woman at the end, but just throughout the way that she behaves through the movie. You see these moments where you're just like, these are the things that make her think that they're better off without her. And and that's where that kind of deeply personal horror comes from, because what it does lack in, like, moment-to-moment scares elevates it as far as just that personal horror of this is, like, the real shit that people actually go through.
And to that point, the writer for this movie originally wrote the script about himself, and it was called The Man in the Yard. And it's kind of sat around for a really long time, and it was something that he was formulating because he was dealing with stuff. And then eventually it gets sold and gets turned into this movie. And then when the director comes on board, that's when it gets changed from The Man in the Yard to The Woman in the Yard. But the writer talks a lot about how so much of what makes the movie feel authentic came from the director and the actress, because all the art that you see that Ramona did, that's by that actress, that she did that stuff, that she is an artist. Yes.
That's cool.
So, like, there is this sort of personal layer here of, like, the guy who wrote the script wrote it because he was writing about depression, but then the director and the actress kind of breathe this extra life into it because they're adding their own sort of mixed bag to it, where she's putting in all of the real motherly feelings that she can convey into this story, and then the director is trying to balance that between the script and her performance. And it's really like a testament to a movie's not made by just one person. It's not just the writer. It's not just the director. That sort of collaborative effort and how people can bring out the underlying themes and change them up is kind of the essence of it. I don't know what the original script was like, aside from the fact that it was called The Man in the Yard. But the writer's pretty open about the fact that a lot of the movie doesn't feel like his script, but in a good way. He's really happy with the changes that they ended up making on set, even though there isn't another credited writer. And I got to imagine, if that's the case, a lot of the stuff between the mother result of changing the narrative from an isolated guy dealing with depression to a single parent mother dealing with depression, because I think that's where a lot of that authenticity really comes in, where you're seeing these actors bounce off of each other. You're seeing the real cost of a lot of this stuff, because you could, in one world you could see this as just like a 2-person 1-act play where it's just a person in a room and then a dark figure and they're talking, but it's filled out with this broader life about a family, about being bogged down by a family, about having your own shit that you're dealing with that you can't because you're responsible for another. And I think that resonates a lot more when you're talking about a woman who becomes a mom, who becomes a wife, whose whole life becomes subservient to these other things. And whether or not those things are worthwhile are beside the point, because she has to divorce herself from who she is in a way that she can't walk away from the way a man could. And I really like all of that about it. I feel like there's a lot more touches of humanity in this than I think you'd ever see in any other Blumhouse slop horror picture.
Yeah, I also like the decision to center it on an all-black cast and a black family, simply out of just the more kind of broader point that not only are black faces not super common in horror, I mean more so now than in the past for sure, but like I feel like we also very rarely talk about mental health and suicidal thoughts and depression within the lens of like black people or the black community. I feel like that's something that goes very underexplored. And it is interesting that this movie, which is I don't know anything about the writer, but you know, the director being a not black guy, it seems like a lot of, I would assume, experience is coming from the actors playing Ramona, the actors playing the woman, because it always feels authentic to that experience, at least as much as I can understand it as someone who does not come from that ethnic background. But it always feels very authentic. You know, there's never anything in there that kind of takes me out from that sort of POV on this topic.
Yeah, and something that's really good, something that really like marries that with the way the movie is shot, is a really common problem and a lot of common criticism about a lot of Hollywood movies, but horror in general, is if you don't work with people of color, you're just not good at lighting or photographing them. And it really shows, because when you watch a lot of horror movies, the characters that are lit the best are the white people, and the characters that are lit the worst with the worst lit scenes are the people of color or the black people. But this movie is so well shot that never really becomes a problem. Jordan Peele's last movie, Nope, does a lot with that idea about the idea of like what happens when you're photographed, what's it like to be photographed authentically, and all that stuff. That's definitely worth watching if you're curious about like blockbuster filmmaking and the black experience with that. Like, it's a great movie. But I think for having a Spanish director and a white writer, they do a really good job of making sure that like even the night scenes are lit well. All the scenes in the house when the power is out are lit well. It never feels like the frame is being sacrificed because the people involved aren't comfortable or don't know how to photograph their actors, which is a much bigger problem than you'd think. But like you could go to any movie with a black lead, and if it's got a white director and a white cinematographer, 9 times out of 10 you're going to notice things where it's like clearly they didn't pay attention to how the lighting was going to hit the actor.
Dude, so much streaming slop does not know how to light stuff at night.
Yeah, 100%.
And this movie does. Like, this movie, I'm like, the scenes that are taking place in the dark, I can still very clearly tell what's happening. And it's just the way they light it to make it, feel darker, but we're still not losing that clarity of the frame. We're not losing that clarity of what is actually happening. Where so much streaming slop, and I'm just gonna keep calling it that because fuck it. The image is so washed out and flat that as soon as it's nighttime, I just now cannot make out anything that's happening. Whereas this movie, and I think maybe it is because he's so making sure that he is properly lighting and showcasing black faces, maybe that is what lends to that. I don't know, but I know that the nighttime scenes do not lose the depth of the daytime scenes, and that is impressive.
See, I guess I'd push back on
and it's
that
even more
a little bit
impressive
before we go on to something else, because maybe it's just the way that I watched it, given that Haley was doing something, so I couldn't, like, turn all the lights off in the house at the time. So, you know, you get, like, lights on in the house, dark scene on TV, it gets real hard to see. And I guess if I'd been watching anything else, I would have absolutely no idea what was going on. But this one, I didn't... I was able to, like, just barely make out, like, the outlines of the faces. I could kind of follow some of it, but a lot of those pitch black scenes, like, in the attic and stuff, became really hard for me, at least my personal viewing, to discern.
It might depend on your, because, like, when I watched it at home on my TV, I had zero problems. But I was watching a few, like, I had it on in the background. I was watching some scenes of it on one of my monitors at work, and I was just like, wow, this is really hard to make out. So it could be it could be all kinds of stuff like that, like, depending on where you're watching it and the conditions. But I will say, regardless, I do think it looks better at night than most streaming movies.
It is also kind of a case in point here of, like, the reason so much streaming stuff looks bad is they make everything intentionally flat so that it looks the same regardless of whether you're watching it on your phone, a movie theater, or a TV. It's all uniform because they don't care about the presentation of the picture. Whereas this, there probably is a lot of diversity in how it looks compared to streaming Blu-ray, your monitor, or your phone, because it's lit for a very specific viewing experience. So when you're watching it within that experience, it looks good, it looks great. But when you're doing it in a thing where it's not optimized for it, it does look bad. So, like, if I was gonna watch it on my phone, I imagine it wouldn't look as good as, like, my OLED.
Yeah, no, I was
TV
watching on 4K TV, and just I think it was just because I had the light on in the house. It really, like, made it difficult to discern. You know, I just not quite, but a good chunk of the screen was just a reflection of my living room. So, yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
The monsters in the house now.
That'd be an interesting. I don't know how you would make that happen in a movie. Like, that could be an interesting technique to use in a horror movie. If you could, like, guarantee somehow that the person was going to be able to see themselves in, like, that very, like, Black Mirror kind of way. It's an interesting thought.
I will say I had that thought a few months ago when I was watching Lost Highway, the David Lynch movie. I don't know what the consensus is on with Lost Highway as far as horror movie, but it's maybe the most terrifying movie I've ever seen, so I'm going to call it a horror movie. But there's a lot of scenes in Lost Highway where they're just so pitch black, where you're seeing a really dark room or you're seeing a really dark hallway, and watching it on my TV, even with, like, all the lights turned out and stuff, I still see myself in the reflection of the screen a little bit. But because the mood is so oppressive, and because it's a movie that's so much about reflecting on masculinity as an idea and violence and its association with it, the idea that you get to look at yourself as a guy on the screen watching a movie about violent men, it kind of does prompt some weird introspection that David Lynch probably wasn't intending, but it works.
Way to look at it. Yeah. But, yeah, as far as just the lighting point went, that scene still did not work for me. I very actively remember watching it and going, just blue. We used to do this. If it was dark out, then it's blue light. That's just all it has to be.
The rule. I will say this is somewhat tangential, but I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that scene in the attic. I loved when the sun turns the flashlight on for the first time, and you get, like, 2 frames of the woman's face with no like music sting, no nothing. It's just this, like, super quick. It's like it would be a jump scare, but it's almost too fast to be a jump scare. And I loved that. I thought that was cool as fuck.
Yeah, I love that whole attic sequence, especially when the lights kind of going haywire and it's just flashing as stuff is happening. That's such a cool erratic thing to do, and I think it really it never sort of resorts to like pure confusion, but it does still have that sort of chaotic motion that really works.
Yeah, I'd agree. I did like the attic scene. Once the flashlight was going on, and again, just that whole sequence of her approaching the daughter is just like the absolute best sequence in the movie to me. Especially because like she just like it's not just that she's got the face that's all fucked up now from getting hit with the golf club, and it's not just that like the actress is just so whisper thin. That like the cheekbones and stuff, you can just like it looks like a skull with skin stretched over it kind of thing. But also like her hands like all dark and like looks like out of proportion with the rest of her body. Like that's probably the thing that got it the most, because she's like reaching out and trying to be all comforting at the same time. You know what I think? Let's talk about this, because we already talked a little bit about the like the gore factor and the violence factor not quite feeling like it earns that R rating. Do you think that they should have let the woman in the yard actually kill one of the kids? Or do you think that would just have muddied the water of the film too much? Like, probably not the daughter, probably the son, given the way that the mother had aggression toward the teenager. But do you think that they should have just committed and let the monster do that?
I mean...
Yep, just ignore it.
Oh, you still there? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how much you're wanting to commit to. Because, like, I've already seen readings from people who are just like, oh, well, what really happened here is that it's a situation where the mother actually did a double murder-suicide, and she killed her kids and then killed herself, and that's what the story is really about. And I'm like, I feel like if you have the mother kill one of the kids, what you're either doing is definitively leaning into that, or maybe you're doing a metaphorical thing where her relationship with whatever child is so like permanently frayed and damaged by her erratic behavior that there's like a lack of communication, like they're almost dead to each other, which I think also could have worked. So given the setup that they have here, where the thing is purely metaphorical and that there's no real physical entity there, I guess it just depends on how you would do that, because that would kind of dramatically change how this story plays out, I feel.
I think to a certain extent, because so much of it is Ramona's own internal conflict about who she is and struggling to live this life, that the aggression towards the kids it's all just like runoff. It's all just residual. There's no like animosity between them. It's just they're catching strays from what she's dealing with. So if the thing did straight up kill one of the kids, I think you're basically writing a different movie at that point. You could probably maybe say something about kind of like The Monster, where I feel like the movie sort of pulled its punches a bit. You could maybe do something where like the kids do come to like more sort of physical harm as a result of her kind of going down that darker path. But again, I sort of feel like the movie fundamentally would have to change if you're going to accommodate that, because I think there is enough of that complicated, leaning more towards the negative relationship that she's fostering with the kids, not as a result of the fact that she doesn't love or care about them, but just purely because she doesn't have the emotional capacity to be the mom that they need, that it still works for me. Like I mentioned before, like so much of when she has her outbursts, because they're in her mind, there's no release or there's no coming down from those moments with the kids. From the kids' perspective, she's just yelling and then doing a 180. That's just what she's kind of become. And that everything else is being damaged or hurt in the maelstrom of her emotions, but it's almost like she's looking past them most of the time. And so I think because the movie is so much about her specifically, the fact that you can read a lot of that into it based on the way the relationships are depicted, but never so much that you break from her, is probably for the best. Because if she did really like physically harm one of the kids, or one of the kids died, I think you'd have a much harder time sympathizing with her as a character, and the movie really does need you to sympathize
fair enough.
with her.
It's a hard line. Maybe they just should have really like brutalized those fucking chickens or dog or something then, to sell it for me more. But I don't know. I was just thinking about the whole sequence of the "I would never hurt you" kind of thing. I'm like, would that hit harder if like she had already killed the son or some shit? You know, because like. I guess I had that, thinking about it more now, I think I might have had that kind of in the back of my head as something that would happen, given that we'd been doing these themes on, like, mother-daughter movies kind of thing. And with the son here, and seeing, like, how aggressive the mother was toward him, and how the creature was clearly going to be a metaphor for this woman's depression and her getting like just more and more unhinged. I was like, oh, maybe she's going to take out the son, and then like it's going to be on the daughter and to like save her or not or whatever. And that isn't where it went, but that might have just been where my head was at with it. That like I was kind of maybe prepared for the son to die but the daughter to live, or something like that in this film.
And I will say it's ambiguous because they don't literally say it, but I think visually the idea is pretty clear that she killed the dad. That she sees the woman in the rearview mirror, she's not shaken, she just keeps driving, and then they get into an accident. There's no like cut or anything of her swerving or her looking shocked or whatever. Like it seems pretty clear that night ended with she intended to kill both of them in a car accident, and she just happened to survive. So I think that might also sort of poison the well there with her too. And the things that do end up dying, the dog and the chickens, those are all just expressions of the stuff about her life that she kind of hates. She's never nice to the dog at all, and she doesn't want to live on the farm. She wants to live on the city. So what does? She kills the chickens and she kills the dog.
I agree. It's just, I guess maybe I was like primed for the son to die or something. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all I had that I wanted to talk about with this one. Do we have anything else lingering that needed discussed for this movie?
No, I'm pretty good.
No, good. Soundtrack is good, but
yeah, it's a good score.
I was distracted. The scene where like it's meant to communicate something unsettling, so you get all these like discordant little like string plucks that are common, and I keep thinking about, it takes me out every fucking time. It's not the movie's fault. I keep thinking about this fucking reel I saw, or this TikTok I saw, that was like every A24 movie trailer, horror movie trailer, and it's like someone with like a plastic container for sushi with a rubber band over it, and they like pull the rubber band over it, and it makes these like ding, 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 ding. Like,
where's the lie?
Every fucking time, and it only does that like musical flourish once in the movie, but it was enough for me to just go like, ah, damn it.
You can only get out of the slop factory so much.
I know, I can't escape it. But no, nothing else really to say. Just can't really praise the performances of Ramona and the woman enough. They're both so fucking good.
Well, let's go ahead and go into ratings then. I will go ahead and give The Woman in the Yard 3.5 out of 5 cars with just a dead battery in the garage. I don't know how they're getting around. Oh, sorry, side thing. Last thing to think about. It's always impressive how movies nowadays have to invent reasons characters can't use their cell phones. I'm always kind of on the lookout for that. That We've created a technology in horror movies that kind of like just solves the problem 9 times out of 10, and we always have to invent a reason why it doesn't work.
I'll give this 3.5 out of 5 Doritos omelets.
Nice. I'll give it 3 out of 5 long ass Silent Hills of leaves tunnels in the middle of your house.
Alright. Well, that'll do it for our horror movie reviews for Horror Month. We'll be back on Halloween to do a special episode topic discussion, so please come check that out. I don't know what it'll be on. We'll talk about that after the fact. But see you then. Until next time,
I'm Sick Part 2.
I'm gonna change. I don't know what to say. I want to change my sign off so I'm not like the suicide erotica lover.
I was gonna say, are you committed to the bit?
I'm not that committed, apparently.
But you're the Silent Hill erotica lover. Isn't that the same thing?
No, I want to fuck the monsters, not the vague concept of killing yourself and being depressed.
What is Pyramid Head if not that?
A big muscle dude with presumably a large penis.
how disappointed would all the sickos on the internet be if Pyramid Head had a micro dick?
I need it. Silent Hill 2 remake again, but this time it's the micro penis cut.
Alright, fuck it. And we are your ghouly gentlemen, and we will be dissecting things. I don't
Ha 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 ha!